Hello everyone and welcome back to Rare Japanese Sounds. I apologize about the lack of video last week because I was moving house, but this week we are back with a new episode of what I've been buying for the last month. You might remember last month I said, I might crank down the number of records I would buy for this month, but in reality I found a big number of records that I was looking for and never actually found for good prices. But this month they all came together and all for good prices. So I'm pretty happy to have a long video to show you all this week. And I would like to start, this is the first time I'm doing this, so let's hope it goes well, but I actually found a second copy of Erin Resort by Hiroshi Yoshimura. Of course, usually when we see copies of the album, we are limited to the originally transparent jacket, but now, because of age, it's almost always yellowing. This is a record that is usually pretty beaten up, and it doesn't have a lot of visual appeal to it, but it's still the easiest record, at least in its original pressing by Hiroshi Yoshimura, to find. However, it's much harder to find it with the original plastic bag with which it was distributed for free in Shiseido stores back in 1984 on a special day. Of course, that makes it not a very hard to find record, but this green bag is actually pretty hard to find. And because I found it online for a good price, I thought that why not try to sell it to one of you who really wants it. So if you're interested in getting this very iconic record by Hiroshi Yoshimura with the actual green bag, feel free to send me an email or a message and we can try to work something out. Okay, next up is something that is not going to be for sale, definitely. This is a very special single version of Tasogare no BAY CD by Junko Yagami. Of course, you might remember this jacket because it's the same jacket as the album Full Moon, of which the song was a part of. And the song was also released on a 7-inch record, but this is a 12-inch record, and it uses the Full Moon jacket with a small sticker to say, this is actually what they call special midnight version of Tasogare no BAY CD by Junko Yagami. This is so rare that when I found it in a record shop for a very good price last month, actually, I had to look it up because I had no idea what it was, and I was pretty happy to look it up because it's apparently extremely rare and extremely desirable for collectors. And when you think about it, this is really one of the rarest, rarest popular city pop songs out there. And let me explain what I mean. Of course, city pop, it has a huge number of popular songs, but you have really the most popular ones, the ones that people click on first. So you have Plastic Love, you have maybe Stay With Me, and BAY CD might be one of the most popular city pop songs out there. And the fact that there exists a special version and an extended mix, and you know that the version of Plastic Love that has 40 million views or something on YouTube is an extended mix. So there is always more value for getting extended mixes like that. So this is really a top tier collector's item, and I'm very glad to have found it randomly and not knowing about it even. Like, it's much rarer than the 12-inch Plastic Love record. And the Plastic Love record is already not very popular and pretty controversial because it's very different from the actual Plastic Love song. It's a heavy remix. This is very true to the original, and that's why it's a record that I really enjoy having in my collection and probably not selling, maybe not ever. Anyway, next up we have a record that now needs no introduction because we're of course talking about Spacy by Tatsuro Yamashita. His second album and probably his most popular album, if not counting For You and maybe his later albums in the Air and Moon labels. I'm not sure exactly why Spacy is so much more popular than most of his other albums. For instance, I prefer Go Ahead to Spacy, but it's still probably his most expensive normal record, I would say. If we don't count special albums like It's a Pop in Time or Joy, I think this might be his most expensive one. And it's not a very difficult album to find. You can always find it for sale on Yahoo Auctions or on Discogs. But I just never really found a good deal for it. And since I was in a record shop and they were selling this for a good price, so no shipping fees and all that, I was pretty happy to grab this VG Plus copy without the OB. But as a collector, you might think that I would always try to find the best looking copy, but honestly, I'm more looking to find the best deal for my money, even if the album is not in near mint condition. It's a really different ways of collecting, but that's a topic for another video. Okay, moving on, we have an album that is not that well known, but it has been expensive for a very long time, including abroad. I was able to find eBay listings of this sold for several $100s, even back in 2004 or like a long time ago. And usually we don't have a lot of price data on, you know, those kind of records. And if you look at probably past sales for albums like this boy, 10 years ago it would have probably been worth maybe $30, $40. But this was already expensive back then, and it's still expensive now. It's a very rare kind of record that has managed to conserve its value through time. So for a bit of an explanation about the record, it's called Psychotic Cube by a group called Vizion. And in Vizion, you find people who later had careers in singing, and the most well-known of those is Kenjiro Sakiya. According to Kenjiro Sakiya, by the way, there were only 5,000 copies of this made, which is pretty low for a pop album. And also, this album was made when Kenjiro Sakiya was very young. I think he was only maybe 20 or 22. So you have a lot of very original pieces of music in that album, and especially the 3 first tracks of the A-side I like very much. Anyway, this is a pretty interesting record, and I bought it maybe as a test to see how the market is going to behave for a record that has been expensive for so long, especially as in city pop, most of the high prices we have today are from maybe 5 years ago, or not much more than that. So let's see how the market changes, and maybe in 2025 you will be looking at this video and the market will be completely different. In any case, this is a record I have meant to buy for a long time, but I already had the CD, and a couple of months ago, maybe last month even, I showed you the cassette version of the album, which is probably the rarest media to find it on. But this is the actual record version of This Boy by Hiroshi Satoh. Of course, probably the most popular or second most popular album by Hiroshi Satoh, a compilation of songs that were used in advertising and that kind of stuff. You can see it because it's already in a transparent sleeve, but it's still in the shrink wrap. Of course, the shrink wrap was unsealed, but I've always wondered why this particular album was pretty easy to find still in the shrink wrap, whereas it's not that common to find that in other albums. Anyway, the condition is really stellar. It's not often that I have a record that is in perfect condition like that, of course, because it was kept in the shrink wrap. Even the obi, it has some kind of flashy orange color. I think it's pretty interesting. And of course, this is a fundamental album of CD pop collecting. I definitely recommend it, but you can also go for the CD, which actually has the same value as record. Now, this is a small item that I only bought because it was on my previous YouTube channel. This is Windy by Jin Kirigaya. Maybe I have shown it in my previous video, actually. I can't remember for sure. But I love Jin Kirigaya. I think he's a very underrated artist. It's not easy to find his records for sale. And right now, specifically Vermilion has seen a big increase in price. For some reason, Windy has been trending behind in terms of prices, but I think it's still a very good album, and I like some of the songs on side 2 very, very much. So yeah, let's see what happens in the future for this album, but if the artist manages to find some popularity among city pop fans, the prices of the album will follow, because this is only a $10 to $20 album. It's very easy for an album to shoot in price from $10 to $100. But it's much harder for the album to go from 100 to 1,000. Even though it's the same multiplication by 10, you have a lot fewer people who are willing and who have the disposable income to spend $1,000 on a record rather than $100. Anyway, moving on with, again, a very well-known album. This is Tasogare by Mai Yamane, I think she's called. Of course, this is a mainstay album, and probably only because of one song in the album, the song that everybody knows. But still, it doesn't make the album less important and less popular. Of course, it has just been released as of maybe 1 to 2 months ago with a great tracks reissue. So reissue very conform to the original, same design and all that, but I say it all the time, if you buy a reissue, your album can still be reissued at any time. Whereas if you buy the original, it will always be the original no matter what. So that's why I would definitely buy this one rather than the reissue. And both are the same price, like almost exactly at the same price. Don't spend the same price for reissue when you can get the original. Here is another album that was reissued and that is still very expensive, at least for the original. This is Cologne by Kaoru Akimoto. Of course, an extremely popular album among the more funk boogie fans, who are sometimes not the same as the city pop fans. So it's a pretty nice overlap, and probably became popular because of a mix of vaporwave and many other things. Of course, stellar album, pretty hard to find, and honestly, I think it's around $150 to $200 record, but the reissue is already worth $100, so why not spend money on the original? That's what I really don't understand about some of the way the market is behaving for these recent reissues that have a very limited press run. Again, for this, if you're going to spend $100 on the reissue, just buy the original, and in 20, 30 years, you will be thanking me. And actually, I think all the other albums right here have been reissued and are still pretty expensive. Even as the reissue, this is Fuyu Kukan by Tomoko Aran. Again, this is an album that needs no introduction because, again, thanks to Vaporwave and the YouTube algorithm, extremely well known for Midnight Pretenders and I'm in Love, I guess. This album has been very stagnant in terms of price, and I think it's even a bit retracing down, probably because of the reissue, but the reissue itself is quite expensive. This is again the type of album that you should buy as the original, even though the reissue looks exactly the same, and you know what you're getting with the reissue. You're getting a sealed record, so perfect quality, but again, this is definitely something you want to buy as the original. Same thing for Relief 72 Hours by Yurie Kokubu. This is an album that costs a lot as the reissue. Although the reissue is pretty old, I think it's by now it's at least 4 or 5 years old, maybe more. But this is, again, same type of collectors as Cologne. These are the kind of collectors that are versed into funk and boogie, so they have typically more disposable income and are willing to spend more than maybe the standard city pop fan that will buy For You and Spacy. Again, don't buy the reissue, buy this. And finally, for those of you who have stayed all the way until the end, this is a very interesting item that I actually didn't know existed, even though I'm a big fan of the Sound Process label. You will probably see it directly on the front, but it's a copy of Steelway, of course, the original by Satoshi Ashikawa. But on the front, you can see that this is actually a sample disc, a promotional record. And this is particularly rare because usually it's not very hard to find a promotional version of any given record. Sometimes it's even more common to find the promotional versions. But for some reason, the Sound Process label didn't really bother to make a lot of promotional versions of their discs. So they did it for 9 Postcards and Steelway. Actually, by the time they got to the third album in the Wave Notation series, which is the one by Satsuki Shibano, the Eric Satie music, piano music, for this one, actually, they just wrote sample with a pen on the obi and just didn't put any different label for the disc itself. Whereas this one and the 9 Postcards sample version do have a slightly different label. Anyway, that was all that I bought for this month. I know it's a lot and probably we won't have much to show you next month, but I'm pretty happy to have all those very important records for city pop collecting. If you have any questions about any of those albums, or if you're interested in buying the Erin Resort one I showed you at the beginning, don't hesitate to shoot a message. I'm open to offers, but be reasonable compared to current Discogs prices. Anyway, this was Rare Japanese Sounds. As always, I hope that you enjoyed the video, and until next time, stay tuned.